What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Callings and Careers. I am
Mhm.
Christopher Harris, and this is my co-host, the extraordinaire, Miss Jessica Canty. What's up, Jessica?
Hey, Christopher, how are you?
Man, I'm doing absolutely amazing. Doing absolutely amazing.
Awesome.
I'm so
Awesome.
glad to be back. We had I think about a month off
Hmm.
in between recordings, so very glad to be back on Callings and Careers. How you been?
Doing wonderful. I'm enjoying this spring renewal, just enjoying the weather that's being brought in and all the things that are happening in the job market, learning about it. So I'm doing pretty good. Doing pretty good.
Fantastic. And
Mhm.
I'm doing well as well. We're right off of the heels of Easter weekend, and of course, in the church world, Easter is a big deal. It's like the Super Bowl for the church.
I saw on social media that it's like church prom. It's
Oh my
not just
goodness,
it's church prom with all the church with all the outfits, the hats, all of the accessories. It's the church prom.
that's hilarious. That's
Yeah, yeah.
hilarious. Well, I hope those of you that are watching and those of you that are listening, whether live or on demand, I hope that you are also in an amazing season. If you're wondering if you just so happen to stumbled upon us today, you're wondering what this is, Callings and Careers. We are committed to helping you discover your calling and developing your career. We wanted to provide a space for effective conversations for people of faith who are working in professional environments to not feel like they have to turn their faith off, but they can also have their faith fully functional, but also be thriving professionally. And so we're committed to doing all of that at the same time. Jessica, you want to just take a moment really fast and just tell everybody who you are and what you do and give all your
Hey.
alliterations today?
Hey there, I'm Jessica Canty. I am your life and career strategist. I have a passion for helping melanin millennial moms who want high achieving careers. So there's that alliteration. I love talking about all things careers, all things about supporting women and supporting their families. So I can't wait to get into this subject.
Yeah. One day, I mean, we've probably done, I don't know, 10 shows, 12 shows at this point. One day I'm gonna have my alliterations together. You would think I would have it together by now, but one day I'm gonna have my alliterations together.
I think alliterations became a part of my dialect, if you will, in grad school because I had to remember things in order to pass the test. I was like, okay, I got to put some letters to this so I can remember, and then it just kind of stuck. So that's what it
Yeah.
is. It's just a great way to remember things. Hmm.
Oh, and listen, if you have any relationship with the Baptist church, uh, black or white, the pastor always uses alliterations.
Absolutely, and you can remember that message when you walk out of there too.
Yeah. What did he
Absolutely.
talk about today? I don't know, but everything started with a P. Everything started with an S.
Uh-huh,
Everything
uh-huh.
started with a T. I don't know.
Mhm.
So,
And it was
but anyway,
melodic
so
too.
yeah. So y'all, we are excited about today's conversation. As I mentioned, we wanted to give space and opportunity for individuals to that are believers in Christ to understand what it looks like to thrive in your career. And we recognize and realize that we're filling a void for many people. Before I move forward, let me just very quickly also introduce myself. I'm Christopher Harris, and I have the extreme pleasure of not only being an executive pastor, but being the founder and CEO for diversechurchjobs.com, where we help people of color in particular find incredible ministry opportunities and connect those opportunities with those candidates as well. So very honored to be able to be here with my co-host and just love the work that we're doing and the content that we've been able to create. So today we're talking about interviews that make an impact.
Mhm.
Interviews that make an impact. And man, well, let's start here, Jessica. I'm sure you've seen some interviews gone wrong.
Hmm. In my HR experience, I've seen some interviews that just got stopped in the middle of them and said, we're not going to go any further. We're not going to, make you any more uncomfortable, make this any more awkward than it has to be. But yes, I've seen some train wreck of interviews. I've seen some near misses and just some after, the debrief after the interview, like, where did we go wrong? We definitely derailed. So I've seen a story or two. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sitting here thinking about it. I don't know that I've ever seen I don't know that I've ever seen an interview that has been cut off in the middle of it, but I do know that there's been interviews where people have shut down in the middle of the interview and like they checked out. They're like, I'm done.
Wow.
I don't know which one is worse.
Yeah. I think the one I'm recalling, the one that we shut down was because the person like was shut down. We could determine that. It was like, yeah, I think we could just stop right here. That there's no need to continue. Of course, we said it in a very kind way.
Yeah, we did it. I was conducting an interview one time, and the guy was in the middle of the interview, and he literally stopped the interview and said, "How y'all think I'm doing so far?"
Pulse check. That's the first time I think I've heard that one before.
When I tell you, well, first of all, he was bombing the interview, but to ask that question in the middle of a sentence, like he was literally in mid sentence, Jessica, it was like, "How y'all think?" I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm completely done now.
You clearly didn't have this episode. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say what was even worse about that is, and I got to be careful how I tell this because I know 2 or 3 people that may be watching this and they know this story. But he was doing the interview during his lunch break from his car and he was doing the Zoom interview from his phone. He didn't even have a computer or iPad. He's doing it from his phone, right? And the air conditioning was blowing into the phone. So when we said to him, we're getting a lot of background noise. So he has his windows up. He then proceeds to turn the car off with the windows up. And this was during the summer. So then he starts sweating during the interview. Like, this is bad.
That poor man.
This is bad.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
This is
We
bad.
clearly needed this episode. So if you had anything that's like that experience or you want to avoid that experience, you definitely need to listen and grab a paper and pen for this episode then. I hope he's listening so he can do better next go round.
Lord help him to do better next time. So there's 2 things we want to talk about today. This is actually going to be a 2-part conversation, but 2 things that we want to talk about today in particular that we have prepared for those of you that are watching and listening. First of all, we actually want to take a moment to talk to you about the different kinds of interviews that you might experience. But then the second thing is we're going to give you a list of 4 things that you should know, that you need to know as you're walking into the different kind of interviews that you may have. So let's just jump into it. Jessica, you ready?
Absolutely. So therefore, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I think this is really important because a lot of times people feel like interviews are opportunities to talk about your resume. And so I'm really excited for us to have this conversation because people have that misconception. It really is not just about to talk about your resume. They've already looked at the resume and they've already determined that they want to get to know you more. It's really about, can you fit into the company's culture and are you worth an investment? Because you don't necessarily have to be the most skilled person. Companies are willing to invest in training you. So it is about, can you fit into this culture? And that's why we have to have this 2-part conversation, and 2 focuses in this conversation is knowing those types of interviews and then knowing the 4 tips we're going to give you today.
Yeah, so good. So there are several different kinds of interviews depending on your industry, depending on the process. And this is not to say that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these different kinds of interviews are right or wrong. What is important for a candidate is to know what the interview process looks like, because every format requires a different presentation or a different approach in terms of knowing what that interview process looks like and how you're going to navigate that. So the first kind of interview is an informational interview. An informational interview. And the whole goal here is to simply learn more about the employer, the employee, the job, the industry, the sector that you're in. So this is probably one of the least level of intensity in terms of interviews because this is more conversational and they are open. The company is open and the managers are open to you asking open-ended questions to learn more because you're just seeking information. And I think everybody's walking into this conversation, not so much from the perspective of, do we want to hire you? But we are interested in at least exploring what you know about our industry and our background and our area and that kind of thing. Go ahead, Jessica.
Absolutely. And so this is one that's really informal at times. And so it's usually over coffee. It's usually like at a career fair or conference or between colleagues. So,
Yeah.
like you said, it's the least intense, that informal interview. And it's really just about asking the questions. However, you can learn from your stress management techniques with this type of interview to apply to the other interviews. If you think about it as a mutual assessment process and you're really just getting information about and deciding whether or not you want to share your skills with that company, you can take that calm, informal attitude. Definitely still want to dress for the interview. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But just that same disposition into the interview process, so that it doesn't feel like it's going to be that bombed interview we talked about earlier.
That's so good. So
Mhm.
good. So the second one is what they would call a screening or a telephone interview. A screening or a telephone interview. Now, uh, Zoom, Google Meet, those kinds of platforms, other video platforms have made it a lot easier for that screening
Mhm.
interview to be a video interview. But there are still times where people may do a telephone interview. And I think what's important, particularly under this one, is this is the very first impression. This is the very first step for a lot of people, and your goal is to impress them enough to get you to that second interview, whether that second interview is with the next set of people or in person or whatever that is. But this is almost, I would say, the most important interview, because you got to get them to say, oh yeah, we cannot say no to this person at this point. And I've seen people do telephone interviews, Jessica, in the noisiest of places. You should not, please hear me, you should not do your telephone interview in a coffee shop. Okay, we should not be hearing them take people's latte orders in the background on your very first telephone interview.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I think a lot of times people are in a desperate space and they're afraid to not take the call. And so instead of saying, this is not a great time, is there any way that I can reschedule this time? Can we talk a little bit later? I want to make sure I give you my full attention. So sometimes people don't have a script to be able to say, this is not the best time. But absolutely, if you're in a Starbucks, if you're running around doing your chores, you don't know when the interview is going to call you. So it's to the point of the interviewee that you don't know that, but you can definitely say, I want to give it my full attention. I would even go so far as to say, make sure you're in a space where you're fully dressed for the interview, because we tend to behave differently when we are dressed for an interview, whether it's especially if it's a phone one. If it's virtual, of course you want to be dressed, but if it's over the phone, you definitely change your behavior based on the way that you're dressed. And so you want to make sure that you have your paper, your pen, whatever device you need to be able to write down. And if at all possible, make sure that your phone is not receiving phone calls, or you don't like that as well, because you don't want anything to interrupt the flow of conversation, especially if you're a little anxious about how it's going to go. Put yourself on do not disturb so that you can be fully wired in.
Yeah, and please charge your device.
That part. That part. Have the charger handy. Have it handy. Absolutely.
Listen, I sent an email to a candidate that we were interviewing one time and said, hey, would love to know if you're available this time to do the interview. And they're like, oh yeah, sure, I'll be ready. Call the person, a few minutes before we were supposed to start. And about 12 minutes into the call, the phone hangs up. And I'm like,
Oh.
and I was on a wired connection, so I knew it wasn't me, right? And so I'm looking
Mhm.
around. I'm like, okay, what is up with this? Try to call the person back. It goes straight to voicemail. Okay. I wait like 10 minutes. I call again. It goes straight to voicemail. I get an email like 2.5 hours later. So sorry. Can I call you now? My phone was dead. No, you can't
Hmm.
call me again. No, we're good. God bless you for this next season
Yeah.
of your life you're headed into.
Absolutely. And that goes for internet connection as well. Like I always tell people, you want to test it at the 30 mark and at the 15 mark. And at the 10-minute mark, there should be nothing else that you're focusing in on. So you definitely want to check your
Yep.
internet connection as well. So if you are in the car, your internet connection might be kind of shaky. And if you know you're in an environment where there's a lot of people pulling on the internet, you might want to choose a different environment.
Yeah. The next one is the individual interview. And I think, what's important about this one is, the person has to be prepared for all eyes to be on them.
Yeah.
And they have to have the stamina to not let their mind wander. So, you know, you need to be able to get there early enough so that you can be settled and be calm and not be anxious and worried and hurried and all of that. And, you know, I think one of the biggest hindrances to the individual interview is actually to be well rested. Because if you're tired, it's hard to have the stamina that you need to be able to focus. I mean, think about, right? Like if you're doing a 90-minute interview, you basically like have to be laser focused and on your tip top game for 90 minutes. 90 minutes is a long time when you're tired. It's a long time when you're tired. And nothing worse than seeing people in an interview and they're falling asleep.
Or go like this, yawning. Absolutely. You know, I think a lot of times we get
excuse me, are we boring you?
A lot of times we can get overly anxious for the interview. And so that might disrupt our sleep patterns. And that's actually counterintuitive to being successful for the interview. So get rest. The night before the interview, you're going to know what you're going to know. What you don't know, you won't know. Don't try to cram for the night before the interview. Eat well. Eat things that you know are going to be energy sustainable. I'm not a dietitian, but you could definitely find yourself something with some protein in it so that you can make sure that you're doing that. And make sure you drink water beforehand. Like you said, show up early so that you can make sure you use the facilities before you go into the interview. Because again, you don't want your nerves to create a space where you have to pause and you just want to be in flow for the interview. Because research has shown that the human attention span is consistently getting shorter and shorter each decade. That's why social media videos are 30 seconds long, because people want you to hurry up and get to the point. So you want to make sure that you are building your emotional and mental stamina as well for the interview process.
I've even found as well, you know, Jessica, that when people are tired, their answers are longer. Yeah. And so then they're rambling and then they're starting to say things that they don't really need to say. And it's just not a good look. So I think that's really important. Let's go to the next one really fast because our time is getting away from us here. And I know I want to get to these amazing other points that we've got here today. We also have what's known as the small group or the committee interview. If you want to talk about that one for a moment.
Absolutely. So the small group interview process is you're actually being interviewed with other candidates. And so this one's a bit of a tricky one because you want to be able to show that you're a team player. A lot of people put on their resume, a lot of people will say it in their screening, oh, I'm a team player. But this is an opportunity for the employer to see, are you really a team player? Are you going to take credit for the work that the team did? Are you going to bring something innovative to the team? Are you going to bring something to the table that we can see that you as an individual were able to shine, but you were able to support your group? In the committee interview, this is the one that can be kind of scary because it's a lot of different faces, a lot of different people writing down responses to your questions. But it's really important. And this is where I can bring in my pageant girl days, that if you do have a committee interview, you want to make sure you pan and smile. You want to make sure that even if it's one person that's asked the question, you want to make sure you turn to the question to ask the question, but also share your question, share your answer with everyone else that's there as well. So think like a pageant queen if it's a committee. And if it's a group, you want to make sure that you're working together, just like any type of sports team, but bring innovation to that space.
Pan and smile.
Pan and smile.
You know what you just said? Pan and smile.
Absolutely. You want to make sure you pan and smile. Absolutely.
So you know now I'm going to be looking at beauty competitions trying to figure out if people are panning and smiling.
Listen, now you're going to see it. You're going to see it because there's going to be one judge that asks the question, but she's going to be panning and smiling the whole time to make sure that everyone feels like she's there for everyone. You don't want anyone to feel excluded when you're giving your answers because you never know who's going to be your boss, who's going to be on your team. You don't really know who in the room you need to impress. So impress everyone.
Yeah, I that's good. I walk around when I preach, Jessica. And one of the tips that I picked up from a communicator one time was he said, make every person feel like before you get done that you looked right at them. Now, I don't always look at people's faces, but when you pan, like, you know, you spend a few minutes on this side of the room and then you spend a few minutes on that side of the room, you walk that direction, you're leaning in, you know, you want every person to feel like, man, he was looking right at me while he was talking. That's good. That's good. Let's talk about the on-site interview or the second interview. Oftentimes, this is the second interview, the on-site interview, because the first one, very transparently, I'll say that oftentimes employers will not interview you the first time in person because of that you lose some control over whether or not if the interview goes south or not. If it's going south and you're virtual, then we can go ahead and cut it off pretty quickly. But if I'm in person, you know, and if I've had to invest in time and resources to get you there, and this is not good, listen, I'm going to be more aggravated. So,
Mhm.
okay, so you've made it past the first interview. You've impressed them, and you're like, hey, yes, we want to do that. Then now they're at the second interview, the on-site interview. Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So the on-site interview is an opportunity. Again, it's a mutual assessment process for interviews. You want to make sure that you're assessing the property. You're assessing how you commuted into that space. Is this a space you even want to work in? Look around. Like, is this an environment you want to work in, a community that you want to work in? On-site interviews start the moment you leave your home. So you want to think about putting, again, that pageant queen smile on, making sure that you're kind to everyone, because you don't know who it is that is going to have the ear of the person who's going to hire you. So that on-site interview, sometimes it just depending on who is running the interview, it's an opportunity for you to see the space that you may work in. And again, it depends on the industry. For some on-site interviews, like if you're doing fitness instructor interviews, they may have you go in and see a classroom, or go in and see some of the equipment you may be working with. So it just depends on like the profession. If you're a teacher, they may have you go see the classrooms and see how you respond. That's a wonderful opportunity to ask intelligent questions and give intelligent comments on what you're seeing as well.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I want to get to this last one. There's a couple other ones that we had listed here. The behavioral-based interview, and this is where they actually give you some specific examples that you got to kind of work through from your previous experiences. The testing or the task interview. So, like you mentioned, like if you're going in to do a fitness job, they may actually have you conduct a class, right?
Yeah.
Or if you are going in to be interviewed as a trainer, they may actually have you conduct a training workshop or something along those lines. There's also the stress interview, where they want to put you under a high pressure situation, either individually or with a group, to see how you'll respond. But I want to deal with this last one that we spoke about, Jessica, because I think this one is really important, and we can kind of land the plane on this one. And that is, that's the interview when they don't know they're being interviewed. And I think people often, don't take these things into consideration. So let's just say that you're flying in, to a company from out of town to be interviewed, and they've got a specific company that they've hired to pick you up from the airport, meet you at the airport, pick you up, that kind of thing, take you then to the offices or wherever you're going to meet them. And you don't know, you think this is just a hired company, but you don't know that the company has also been hired to sort of provide feedback on how you treated the driver. How did you treat the bellman? How did you treat the people handling your luggage? How did you treat the people, the concierge? How did you treat the hostess at the restaurant when you got there? So all of those things are also a part of the interview process. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. This is a covert interview where they're really trying to get to know your character. Because again, they can look at the resume and know your skills. They can look at anybody can write your resume. So they really want to know what's your character. That's what they're assessing for. There's an old interview story. I don't know if it's an urban legend in hiring processes, but there was a gentleman that took a candidate out for lunch and saw that the candidate reached for salt for the food before they even tasted the food. And the interview in his mind was already over, because that meant that you didn't assess the situation before you decided to make a decision. It might be an urban legend, but I always share when I talk about interviews in this way, that they're really looking to see who are you, especially if you're talking about interviewing for a position where you're going to represent the company, or they're going to spend a lot of money in your salary. They, nowadays, in the age of undercover boss, in the age of everything being virtual and spreading very quickly. They want to make sure that you represent their company. They don't want to get in anything, something that they don't have to have clean up. So they want to make sure that you have the character to represent their company.
Yeah, you made me think about this. We might have to deal with this in part two. But even in terms of if there's food involved, or you're at a restaurant, I mean, the kind of meal that you order, the price point that you select, even for that, like, a job interview where they're feeding you is not the time for you to get that tomahawk steak. Okay, it's just not the time for you to ask them to pay for $148 steak, and that kind of thing. And quite candidly, if they are taking you to lunch, unless they explicitly say we're going to make space for you to eat without having to answer questions, you probably should be prepared that you're not going to get to eat.
Yeah,
so that's really important. All right, man, our time goes by so fast. So there's 4 things that we want to give the people today that they need to know with regards to actually getting ready for. Well, these are we just gave you guys the types of interviews that you can encounter. We now want to help you get prepared for those interviews that you might have. So go ahead, Jessica. let's jump into that first one.
So the first one is you want to know your tools. You want to know your tools. And when we talk about knowing your tools, know your resume. If you've invested in a resume writer, absolutely. I'm such a fan of that. Know what the resume writer has said about you and your resume. Know how to convey that efficiently. And you want to make sure, I think we even talked offline about this, like know the company as well. So just as much as you know your resume, know the company. They know that you don't know anything about the company, and perhaps you're in the space because we are in a recession, inflation is real, where you are desperately seeking employment. But know a little bit about the company before you go into the conversation. And you want to know that you are ready and prepared. So practice beforehand. So that first one is to know your tools, your resume, your research, and your practice.
Yeah, I can tell you, Jessica, how frustrating it is as an interviewer to be sitting on the other side of the table and you're trying to decide if you want to even, hire this candidate or move this candidate on to the process. And then they're asking questions or approaching the interview and they've never even, they haven't even Googled who the company is, how long the company's been around. And I just think we're at an age now where those things are just not an excuse. Because Google is our friend, it can be our friend. You should be on LinkedIn. You should go on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all those places. Do everything that you can. You need to know, if the owner of the company is married or not, or has kids or not, or what are their pet peeves. Some of those things may show up sometimes on social media. So you need to be able to just educate yourself on those kinds of things. And I think that's all underneath that same umbrella of to know your tools. So the first thing is to know your tools. What's number two?
Number two is to know your brand. So when we're talking about knowing your brand, know how to convey your skill set. I like to tell interviewees to know how to work in your skill set no matter what the question is being asked. It's a politician move. Politicians have their platform and you may see them interviewed and they always come up with answers like that wasn't the question, but you need to know how to convey that. So what are the top 3 skills that you can bring and know a way to be able to present that no matter what the question is that's being asked. So you need to know your skills. You need to know how they are packaged specifically for this position. So knowing them and being able to convey them, but knowing what they need in the position. Of course, they put out the job description, but it really shows the hirer that you're a wonderful candidate if you tell them, no, this is what you're looking for. I heard you say this. I was wondering if you were considering this, and that makes you a more qualified candidate. And know your marketing. And that's a whole nother conversation, a part of that, but knowing your marketing and being honest, knowing how to share when you were a part of a team or whether or not you added innovation, knowing how you're presenting yourself. When I say marketing, know that you feel comfortable in your clothing, that it's something that presents or represents you well. So know your brand.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. And I think the important part, the only thing I'll add to what you said, Jessica, I think the important part of this is I think people have to become comfortable also in acknowledging what they may not be good at, because it doesn't help you as a candidate if you misrepresent your skills and abilities in the interview process, because then when you get hired, if you in fact can't do that, now your credibility is on the line, and that's a problem. So that's really good.
And it's all over social media. There are memes about people, saying, "Oh, now I have to show exactly I'm bilingual, but I'm not bilingual."
Yeah. You trying to speak French when they ask for Spanish.
Absolutely, it's gonna happen. And I mean, don't put that pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Don't put yourself.
I'm really honored to be interviewing for you all, and I think I bring a lot to the table. That one point that you just made, I just want to be clear. That is not a strength of mine. I don't have experience in that. I'm absolutely willing to learn and would be willing to invest. So that could be a sample response for people, as they navigate that. So the first thing in terms of preparing for an interview is to know your tools. The second thing is to know your brand. What's the third one?
The third one is to know your value. Unfortunately, what's going on now is that a lot of companies are not placing salaries on job descriptions. And so candidates are going through the process of applying, all the process of, uploading your resume and answering those questions and all that good stuff. And then you don't see a salary point on the job description. So a lot of candidates are like, well, I don't even know if I should apply, but you should know what your salary point is and what your value is, even if they haven't posted it. It's unfortunate that a lot of companies are doing that. And there's a lot of conversation about changing that, putting into law that they need to put the salary on their job description, but it doesn't matter what salary they put on there. You need to know your value. You need to know what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. So definitely sit down and think about. Of course, there's a whole equation, and maybe we can go into that in part two. But know your value before you walk in there, because they're always going to give you something based on their budget, but you've got to think about your own budget when you go in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a whole conversation by itself. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I think you can have this conversation, the salary conversation, too soon. I think there's some people that, and I think this is why it's important for you to know the interview process. Because if they're saying to you that there's only one interview that you get and then that's it, then you bring that up at the tail end of the conversation, right? You don't lead with the money conversation, because the perception that you will send is, I like y'all, but I'm more concerned about the dollars. And that's not the message that you want to send, nor should that be the message that you want people to receive. That should not be your priority. So I just think, you do need to know your value. You need to do everything that Jessica just talked about. You also need to know the rhythm and the timing of the interview process and knowing when to bring it up. And I think oftentimes the wise time to bring it up is when they bring it up. Let them bring it up. Let the company bring it up, and then be prepared to respond accordingly. And you've done your research, as Jessica just alluded to. So that's really good. All right. We're getting to the last point here. All right. So the first one is to know your tools. Number 2 is to know your brand. Number 3 is to know your value. What's number 4?
The last one is to know your follow-up. How are you going to seal the deal? How are you going to make sure that you leave a lasting impression? So this is a really nerve-wracking time period for interviewees. It's like, I don't know if they're going to call me back. I don't know what the next, I think I bombed. I'm really nervous. Over and over again, I hear clients say that, and then they get a call for a second round interview, or they get a call for a third round interview. So know that, the interview process is continuous, and then know how you want to follow up. Is the follow-up, put on your calendar 2 weeks out? Hey, I would, sending out that thank you note, whether it's virtual or handwritten, whether or not, and you can even ask, if you don't get the position, is there any way I could talk to the HR rep about how I could have done better? Or what was the candidate's qualifications that got the job? I'm telling you, it's very important. Even in my own job experience, I interviewed for a position and someone else was more qualified, and I asked for the right opportunity to talk to one of the interviewers, and they were saying she had more experience. So I went back to the drawing board, and just 30 days later, I wound up getting the job and $10,000 more than what I originally interviewed for. So it is very important to know how to seal the deal. And that means asking the follow-up questions, being prepared for that round 2, round 3 interview, especially if you're interviewing for government positions or anything with security clearance. You got to prepare yourself, prepare your team to seal the deal. Make sure everybody knows, your recommendations are prepared, making sure all the things you need for your background check is prepared. That's the way you seal the deal.
Yeah. Somebody just asked a good question in the chat. Most HR managers start off with asking salary expectations before you've had a chance to speak with the hiring manager or team. How can you tactfully defer the question? First of all, on paper, when you're applying, if they ask that, I think you do your level best to just type in, it's negotiable, right? If you're, depending upon your experience, your background, your industry, people already know at least what that starting range is. And that in fact there is a range. I think secondly, I think it's important for you to say, I appreciate you asking me that on the front end, because that says that you guys value people here and you want people to feel valued. I would be more comfortable if we determined that when there was a little bit more clarity about whether or not we're going to move forward in this journey together or not. I think that is a healthier answer, or a healthy answer, or something along those lines. Doesn't have to be that quite that verbiage. But I just think I've never seen it work out well when we get bogged down in the salary conversation on the front end of the interview process. So that's how I respond. I don't know, Jessica, how would you respond to that?
Absolutely. I'm just going to build on what you shared. It does behoove us before we even submit a resume to know what our price point is, especially for women of color, most specifically Black women. Typically, when we hear this question, we get really scared. And so we want to lower our salary because we want to work there. So the question will become, like, you have to have in your mind, like, let's just say and I'm just going to lowball it, you need to make $10,000 a year. right? Don't tell them that you'll settle for 3,000. You want to make sure that you're as close to that $10,000. This is why you have to do your salary equation. So if you are able to tactfully say that, and I mean, some HR managers will say, well, we're only going to pass on people who already are within this range because we don't want to, to lead you on, whatever the case may be. You can definitely share with them your salary range and let them know if that's something that it's still negotiable, and there's some things that you would like to consider in terms of overall benefits as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also to your point, Jessica, I have seen there have been times where people have made a lot of demands when they haven't proven that level of demand.
Yeah.
So if you're a first or second year person in, you can't come in demanding what the people that have been in the career 20 years are getting. So I think that's important. Number two, I think it's really important for you to know what are the norms for that industry. Because if you come in and you're asking for, not only salary, but you're asking for, phone allowance and, 4 weeks vacation and, whatever else, if that's not the norm for that industry, then now you look really greedy. And that's, and that's a problem as well. So I think it's just important to be really informed and really aware, of what the dynamics are that are at play, so that you'll know, when it is time to have that conversation, what this actually looks like and what this means, for you. And I think here's the last thing I'll say to this. In many industries, you can negotiate saying, even though this may be my starting salary with you all, is there a point, in the near future, 6 months, a year from now, where if there's some KPIs, that is key performance indicators, or some benchmarks that I've met, that we can come back and have this conversation again, that may allow this to be increased, And so, all those things I think factor into that. Go ahead, Jessica. Look like you're
absolutely. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because asking what the promotion potential is and what it would look like, especially in industries where you can earn a license, and that might require the company to reconsider your salary. It's very important to ask those types of questions in the beginning. I can remember interviewing for a company, and I hadn't received my clinical license as of yet, and I was preparing to get my clinical license, and I asked, would the salary change if I got my clinical license? And I was told no, it wouldn't, because we don't require that license. So in my mind, the interview was over. But that's a part of that mutual assessment process as well, asking that, because it shows that you're invested in the company and not just motivated by money. Listen, we know that we need money to survive, but especially if you're interviewing for a small company, they need to know that you're on board with their mission, because they may be trying to expand the company. And if someone who's only motivated by the money wouldn't be the best fit for a small company.
Y'all, this has been a master class. Y'all have gotten a master class in about 45 minutes. And so this is a part one, interviews that impact part one. We're going to come back in just a few weeks, and give you part two of interviews that impact. It's going to be really, really good. We've got at least 10 things that we're going to be talking about underneath that topic. But take these 4 things that we've shared with you today. Know your tools, know your brand, know your value, and know your follow-up. Those 4 things are great starting points for this entire conversation. And if you're not following Jessica, if you're not following me, we'd love for you love all of you all to come in and give us a follow. I'm going to throw Jessica's website up here so you can see that, jessicacanty.com. And all of her social media is there. Here's my website, christopherjharris.com. And of course, all of my social media is there. My second website, diversechurchjobs.com. I would love to have you come in and connect with us, and follow us on social media. Jessica, what else? Anything else? Closing comments or remarks before we get out of here?
You can do this. You are sitting in the seat of control and power in this interview process too. So go ahead and let go of the anxiety, let go of the angst. This is a mutual assessment process. It's your time, and you can do it.
I love it. Preparation often eliminates panic. Preparation often eliminates panic. And so, so let's prepare as best as we can. You don't have to over prepare, overthink it, be overly anxious, but you do want to eliminate that panic, and that preparation will allow you to do that. So we'll be right back here. This is Callings and Careers, Christ-centered coaching conversations is what we are focused on. I'm Christopher, that's Jessica, and we'll see y'all the next time. Peace.